So I've been watching the old Spider-Man series from the 90s a lot recently, so I thought it'd be fun to talk about it on video. This is Spider-Man by Saban, the same company that brought us Power Rangers and the 90s animated X-Men series. As you can imagine from that, this series came about from the success of that particular series, and obviously was handed to the same production company because of how well they did on the previous one. And to be honest, I actually like Spider-Man a lot more than X-Men the animated series. X-Men the animated series is still a good series, but I always felt that it was a very messy show in terms of its story writing. It always felt like it was jumping back and forth between different story arcs, but we never really had enough time to focus on a singular one as an actual overarching story. It was very annoying, and granted the comics are like that, but I prefer it when we have a more focused story. And that's where Spider-Man comes in. Now, of course, this is not the only Spider-Man animated series. There was Spectacular Spider-Man and Ultimate Spider-Man after this, and going back into the past, there was the original 60s Spider-Man series and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. But this, I feel, is the best Spider-Man animated series we've ever had, and it's the one that I primarily grew up on. So, as you'd imagine, it's about Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, the boy bitten by a radioactive spider, going about with his life, just being a superhero in New York and also struggling to be a young adult in New York. And actually, it does capture that element very well. One of Spider-Man's key elements is the sort of hard luck hero, the idea that he's not just a superhero who's down on his luck, but he's also a kid who's down on his luck. And I always felt that that was one of the elements that made Spider-Man so popular, that he could be so relatable despite being a superhero. He has money problems a lot, he doesn't always have the best luck with the ladies, and even on stuff that he should just have natural problems with anyway, those problems are way worse than you could normally imagine with school and just regular day-to-day life. And that transitions to his superhero life, where he normally has to take on threats way bigger than he is, and normally multiple ones at the same time. And that's very relatable to both teens and young adults. You feel like you've got all this shit thrown at you at once, and it's hard to really kind of balance it all, and it feels like it's too overwhelming. But if you persevere, you can get some good stuff out of it. And unlike Spider-Man, you will actually get some rewards out of it. That was one of the things that I always felt very frustrated about, that he does all this stuff and he very rarely gets anything in return, except maybe a date. Which, to be fair, that's not too bad, but still, you'd think he'd get a little bit more. But like I said, the show does capture that really well, and Spider-Man's voice acting is excellent. It's that perfect balance of kind of nerdy, but also kind of cool, and it really works. In fact, most of the voice acting is spot on, and some of the guests that they got were really impressive. Ed Asner, aka Carl from Up, is the voice of J. Jonah Jameson, and I maintain that he is still the best animated version of J. Jonah Jameson we've ever had. Obviously, in terms of live action, J.K. Simmons wins hands down, but Ed Asner is very good as well. Roscoe Lee Brown is also hands down the best version of the Kingpin we've ever got. It's very odd to have him with this very sort of quasi-British accent, but it so works, but mostly because Roscoe Lee Brown's voice was incredible. If you've ever seen Roscoe Lee Brown in anything else, Oliver and Company, the Babe movies, you know how awesome his voice is, and he does an amazing job as the Kingpin. And he's the most reoccurring villain throughout the whole series, and I'm so happy for that, because I could just listen to his voice forever. And there are other great voice actors that they pull in there as well. Jim Cummings is the voice of Shocker, Rob Paulsen is the voice of Hydro Man, and weirdly, of all people, Alfonso Riviera, aka Carlton from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, plays Robbie Robertson's son. He's only in about 3 episodes, but he is surprisingly really good in that role. Also, as a nice little nod, James Avery, who plays Uncle Phil in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, is War Machine, which is also a really good choice. I've talked to people about this show lots of times before, and one of the main complaints they have is that they feel that the show is a bit too fast-paced. Which I can kind of see where they're coming from, but I think because it's again focused on one single character, it kind of helps that a little bit. Because the X-Men series was also very fast-paced, but the fact that it was very schizophrenic and jumping back and forth between different characters, that's what made it difficult for me. But as fast-paced as this show is, it does work that we're only focusing primarily on one character. We may skip over to what the villains are doing every once in a while, but the focus is always on Peter Parker, and I think that really helps. It does also kind of come into the fact that each episode is an adaptation of a single comic, but there's also overarching stories which also are derived from the comics in there as well. So they're kind of having to shove 3 or 4 different stories into one episode. But I think they actually handle it pretty well. The first series is definitely the most low-key, where each individual episode is its own self-contained story. So I'd say if the fast pace is a bit of a difficult thing for you, just watch the first series, because that's easily the best one to watch in that regard. But from series 2 onward, each series started having an overarching story that would last for the whole series. So in the second series, it's called Neogenic Nightmare, which is about how Spider-Man's powers, which are derived from something called neogenics, which always makes me feel a bit uncomfortable whenever I hear that word, because it does sound a little bit Nazi-ish. But that's actually how he gets his powers in this one, instead of just being a radioactive spider. And throughout the series, he constantly struggles with the neogenics in his system mutating his body in ways that he doesn't want. In the third series, it's called Sins of the Fathers. Now, granted, the story this time is not quite as overly connected as the second one, but all of them have to do with basically fathers or kind of where you come from in the world. So the first series is about Mary Jane trying to reconnect with her long-lost father, and there's a 2-parter involving Venom and Carnage, and of course Carnage is sort of the son of Venom. It's kind of interesting. Series 4 is called Partners, and it's about how Spider-Man has to accept working with other people. In this case, it's primarily Black Cat, who, if I'm going to be honest, I don't really like all that much. I've never really liked Black Cat that much as a general character in the Spider-Man universe because, well, she's a carbon copy of Catwoman and not a particularly good one. But in this one, it felt like they were trying way too hard to kind of overemphasize how cool she is, especially when she's only had like 1 day's worth of training. Granted, she does have actual superpowers this time, but it just feels like they're trying too hard to emphasize, look at this cool new character. And her voice is a bit annoying as well. It's that constant smarmy, I'm better than you kind of voice, and it just annoys me a little bit. But actually, I will admit, you do get used to her after a while, and she's actually only in about half of the series, so that works out fine. But yeah, this series does focus a lot on Peter Parker having to work with other people, particularly due to the fact that he's going through emotional problems because of what happened at the end of the third series, which I won't spoil. The fifth series does have everything a little bit more self-contained again, whereas instead of being an overarching story for the whole series, it's more like a series of mini-serials that are compacted into about 3 to 5 episodes. So there is one self-contained episode at the beginning, which I won't get into because that's also major spoilers, but then there's the next couple of episodes which are all about the 6 Forgotten Warriors, which is a really cool story arc. Then there's another 2-parter, then there's a 3-parter which is an adaptation of the Secret Wars comic, and then the next 2-parter which is the series finale. It does make it a little bit difficult when you got used to those overarching stories, but these multi-parters are actually some of the best episodes in the series, so it makes it worth it. And that was it. That was the end of the series, despite the fact that it of course ended on a cliffhanger, because all great shows that end up ending early have a great cliffhanger ending that never gets resolved. Though there was a plan to do a Series 6, and if you look online you can see where the story ideas were coming from, and they actually do sound pretty interesting. But of course it never materialized. Instead, it was reworked into the new series Spider-Man Unlimited, which I admit I have not seen, so I don't know if that series is good or not. But either way, I'm glad that this series didn't go on for too long where it started to run itself into the ground, even if the ending was a little bit disappointing. But flaws aside, particularly in regards to the animation, because even though the animation is good, you can tell it's a serious downgrade from the X-Men animation, and they do repeat a lot of stuff over and over again, and there's a lot of times where the lip syncing doesn't match up, but it works for what it is for being a show from the mid-90s. And that and its other flaws aside, I really do love this series, and I think it's one of the best representations of Spider-Man that we have ever gotten. And with Spider-Man 2 on PlayStation 5 coming out later this year, I couldn't think of a better time for people to go back and rewatch this series. It's on Disney+, so you can watch it on there in HD, which is the first time you've ever been able to do that because it never got a full DVD or Blu-ray release. But we'll see what I catch in my web next time.